The actual act of harvesting is a mechanical one, meaning that you physically go to the plant and remove from the plant the material you want to remove to be harvested. And we've gone over multiple times what the priority was for most of the operations is what is the end use, what's the destination. And so if the destination is an extract, then one can hard leaf the plant, which means pull all the major fan leaves off that are still remaining after the drying out process, meaning as the plant is going through its life cycle, it's sucking all the nutrients out of the leaves that are existing, and it's cannibalizing itself, and those petioles wither and fall off, and a lot of times a lot of the leaf material on a well-ripened plant will leave before you ever really have to touch it. But the leaves that are still remaining, you can peel some of those off by hand, and you don't have to be as gentle because those flowers that you're working with are going to be run through some form of extraction. Same goes if you're going to do a terpene extraction. And so terpene extraction simply means that we're going to take the cannabis flowers, we're going to put them in some form of steam distillation device so that we can steam lift the terpene material from the flower material, collect it, and then use it in cartridges as a full plant extract, meaning that all the terpenes were derived from a cannabis plant, not infused from botanicals. So then we can take a true terpene blend that we like and add it to other blends of other cannabis to create quality experiences. So think of it as a tool, being able to pull terpenes from a plant and use it to add those flavors to other products that you're working with is an alternative to harvesting now. Live extraction, meaning we take the cannabis plant, we chop the leaves off, we can bucket, meaning we pull most of these leaves off and we cut it into pieces. You can then put it into freezer bags and freeze it right on the farm, where those trucks then take it off to extraction plants. So these are methods that are relatively quick, very simple. We get into actually using the cannabis plant as flower, which is where really the art comes in, because that is where you can't hide the visual. The end user is going to see what you're working with. And the best way to go about this is to determine what is the market that you're working with first. Is it a bulk market? Meaning, is it more price driven? Is it more pot for less money? And there's nothing wrong with that. There's a price gradient in life, and everyone is going to find the gradient of experience they can afford. And no one is more or less valuable than the other one. And as a cultivator, you have to understand that just because the value of the product is less doesn't mean the care and attention to it can be less. What it means is that you're working with easier to grow varietals that require simpler operational methodology. And when we get into these higher price points, all the considerations have to be taken into point, because the end user has expectations of not just quality of experience in the flower, but quality of experience in how they view it and appreciation of the work that was required to get it to that state. So when we start to go back to how do we go do this, a lot of it depends on the size of the plant. And so large plants or small plants, as long as they're finished, are plants. And the smaller plants, say, 2 feet high, they fill up maybe a 4 square foot area, 2 foot by 2 foot. If you have the right size dry room, which is a space that's sealed, that is cleanable, and so some form of washable walls, washable floors, something that has no dust in penetration, something that's easy to disinfect and clean, something that allows you to have hanging systems that either work in racks or in screens or in strings. But the main point is that you can control the airflow through it and the climate inside it, meaning temperature and humidity simultaneously. It doesn't make a difference how big the material is when you hang in it, because fundamentally the simplicity of hanging whole plant does make up in a lot of effects labor for having to cut it all into pieces and dry it in the space so that you don't have to cut it down later. So you can either cut it now or cut it later, but when you're harvesting a field of cannabis, it's very convenient to take it into pieces that are small enough to work with and hang it. And on a small plant, you can hang the whole plant. And what I would recommend when you're hanging these plants is that you do not leaf it. If you leave the existing fan leaves in place, what they do is they basically dry and fall over the flowers and create these beautiful protective cocoons. And what takes place is it slows the transition of moisture from the inside of the plant out of the plant, and it creates this beautiful buffered system where you're not bleeding everything out too quick, but you're not holding the moisture in too long. And so there's this pulsing, this moisture leaving, moisture coming back in as the plant systematically dries from the inside out till we reach a common level of dryness for the flower. And so when you leave the leaf on it, it protects it. And if you're using mechanized trimming, then those leaves would come off quickly as you broke the plant down. You could just break them off. And then you'd be able to run the cannabis flowers over a plate. If you were going to use mechanized trimming for plants that were green, you could leave the leaves on and run them through the machine, and the machine will just spin them. And I'll get into the considerations of machines next, but you have some options depending on where you go with the end flower. But the main point is, for the majority of flowers we work with, letting the leaves protect the flowers themselves gives you a good secure base. The bigger plants, you have to break them down in size, and if you can break them down into chunks that fit into your drying situation, they work. And chunks mean basically stuff the size of my arm. And you would be able to use many methods of hanging this, or laying it down on a rack, or putting it in a basket, or suspending it in string. Any of the methods work. The more the plant can hang freely, the less you disrupt the shape of the plant. So when you hang it flat, there's always a flat spot on the flower, and if you rotate it, it flattens it out on the sides, and it creates a shape that the eye sees. If you leave it hanging, the irregularities of the flower remain. And for craft flower, that's important because it's one of the ways to let you know that the product was handled from harvest forward in a very conscientious manner. And so when someone who buys a craft product sees poorly handled cannabis on the harvesting and on the drying, they would assume that that same level of care was applied to the cultivation. And so what you want to be able to do is realize that the higher level craft flowers, the ones that you really want to see reach a premium price, they are of a premium value. They're held in a way that doesn't damage the floral shape at all. The irregularities of the flower are one of the visual traits that attract the eye. Your eye moves and dances across the surface of the plant. And if we disrupt that, we have to downgrade the overall quality of it in terms of what the higher level buyer will believe. So we cut all this plant down, and then when we get down to the smaller stuff, we can treat it like we were doing a small plant. We could literally chop it into chunks and hang it, because otherwise we have too many small pieces connected. And those small little tiny pieces, we're going to probably use those in a concentrate later, or we're going to use them to make hash, or we'll use them to put into a distillate through a crude process. Or we could even take them and pull the terpenes from them because they're an actual plant. It's just there's so much of that little material usually remaining that we don't typically want to mix that in with our flour because it's called smalls, and it makes the bag look like it's too stratified between big, medium, and small pieces. So those small pieces can be used for many things. They still have to be treated with all the same level of care and concern as the bigger pieces. It's just that they don't have the same overall value in the eye. So now that we've had the bigger pieces cut and we have the smaller pieces cut and we're hanging them in the room, the basics from there is, what are we doing? And what we're doing is we're trying to get the moisture in the middle of the plant to the exterior of the plant in a rate of speed that doesn't off-gas all the terpenes. And this is where the modern industry does really well in terms of infrastructure, because they have the ability to use sealed rooms that have climactic situations such as very high level dehumidifiers, heaters, and air conditioners, so that they can create a situation where the temperatures are down below 68 so that you're not flaring off monoterps, and you're able to pull enough moisture out of that space at 68 so that the drying process isn't accelerated too long. Because what you start to have happen is you start to have a degradation of the quality of the plant through moisture biological activity. So what happens is it starts to have a moist basement-like experience to it when you smell it. You're allowing the plant to sit wet too long. If you speed the process up and drive the temperatures up, drive the humidity levels down, what you do is you move the moisture through the plant so quickly that you almost suberize it. You seal the outside of the plant, you trap the moisture inside, all the essential oils leave, and you're left with a plant that has very little scent, this strange dry surface, but a kind of gummy interior. And so the wrongs either give you something that smells like it's biodegrading, or it has no smell at all and it's kind of wet inside. Neither one of those is right. And so the whole point of having a room that lets you have control is to give you a situation where the plant is pulsing wet and dry, and you start to see most normal size buds, I would say, dry up in about 4 to 5 days. Outdoor buds might take, 9 to 11 to get like real, if it's thick. It would take about 9 days in order for the moisture to fully leave that flower all the way through the center, all the way to the outside. And I think right now the moisture content levels that you have in California cannabis for legalities are probably running, anywhere from like 11 to 14. And so 14 would be wet, 11 is probably in that range. You get it down into like, 9% to smoke it so there's full combustion. But those are the percentages of the flower themselves when you check it. The room itself could be anywhere in the 50% range, and so some of the little numbers you hear are 60 for 60 for 10, 60 for 60 for 20, 60 for 60 for 30. What that means is that they put a room at 60 degrees, and by being able to use powerful dehumidifiers and heaters so they can have them chase each other, you can keep the room at 60, hold the room at 60% humidity, and that 10-day period is how long it functionally takes to dry it. But because it's at a temperature range that's so low, relatively speaking, if you could hold it for 10 more days or another 10 days, what you would do is you would allow a stabilization to occur in the plant that's technically what we would call curing. And so curing is a process, and it doesn't mean that we just let it sit. It means that we really let it go through a process of a controlled temperature on a decline humidity rate for a specific number of days. And that process is usually one of the things that is probably one of the hardest things to do in cannabis, because you have to be able to have the ability to let cannabis sit for some amount of time in a room that's controlled, that's on a gradient that's going down, holding the temperature constant, and having the flowers have enough aeration through them to be able to allow them to off gas and breathe this entire time. And so we see very little really well done premium cured cannabis, except from basically small craft people who can do it in a very small level. But as we go forward, you'll see more of these techniques becoming more available as we get the technology to make this simpler. But if we can at least dry it for 10, and then we can let it sit for another 10 in this form, it works really well. A lot of times, if you're going to take it out of the dry room and hold it, you have to put it into a space, and once it goes into that space, if the humidity drops and the temperature's high, you flare off the qualities once again. All the aromatic oils leave. But if we can put it into a space and then add ultrasonic fog, some type of mister that leaves a dry moisture, it's an oxymoron, but it creates a higher level of humidity without a lot of water vapor present. What it does, it allows us to hold the cannabis at a humidity level around 45–50%, and there's very little degradation, and we keep the room cool, and same thing, we have the air moving through the space, and it allows us to hold cannabis until we can get it into packaging, into processing. But high-level cannabis can't be rushed. Bulk cannabis can be moved a lot faster. The end user has less expectations. As long as the product is an organic product in the way we define biologically, pest control, biologic fungicides, biologic growth regulators, to where there's nothing that's on the plant that's in any way detrimental to the end user, then all the details that come after that can be shortened. But with the craft products, with the high-level products, it's imperative that all these details be maintained, because anything that decreases from that overall experience of the end user negates the higher price point and the labor.